All right. So, hello everyone, and welcome back to The Wolfer Live. I am Tulani Bridgewater, and I am so very excited to have Jenny Lee here with us today. She's not only a Wolfer, but she's also an incredibly talented author and screenwriter for television, as well as essays and books on, I guess you could say, that are humor. One of the titles of which is hilarious and will definitely come into play when we speak today. But most critically, we're here to discuss her latest novel, which is a young adult novel called Anna Kay. And there it is. And it's a fantastic modern reimagining of the Tolstoy classic Anna Karenina, but told through the lens not only of contemporary America, but more specifically, the Korean American lens. And I would like to not only explore that topic, but also some of the overarching themes of the book. So welcome, Jenny.
Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And just to preface all of this, Jenny and I first met through the Wolfer, and she really saved my behind because I was having trouble getting tickets to a Billie Eilish concert. And she was so generous and reached out to me and actually sent me a sweatshirt to appease my youngest child, my daughter. So as far as I'm concerned, Jenny can kind of do no wrong.
Uh-oh.
But Jenny, why don't you introduce yourself? It's better to have you speak than me.
Yes. Hi, everyone. I'm Jenny, and I live in Los Angeles. And yes, I do remember that event, Tulani, because I remember, to me, that's the best part about Wolfer is that, like, you really just feel like you know everyone. It's like, was a great community. And I remember you commenting about it and being like, oh my gosh, my daughter's so upset. These tickets are so expensive. And I was already going. And I was like, oh my gosh, I can do something because I like impulse bought like on the long line. And I had bought like 2 hoodies. I'm like, why do I as a grown adult need, I think I bought 3 actually. And then I was like, oh, I want to do a good deed and send one to you. So I thought that was, it's like that's what I love about the Wolfer. It really is like a community of women who want to help each other out. So.
Yeah, and thank you, because she wears it religiously. It is now quite soiled and well loved. So, so Jenny, Anna Kay. So I think we can kind of back up before we even get to it. You have a very, I would say, impressive career in television and also in print. And I'd love for you to share a little bit of how you got your start in this, because it's not often that we see women writers, and especially women of color and Korean American women writers, and especially on such large platform, popular and successful shows. So
thank you. You're making my career sound much like more exciting than it is. I think, I went to NYU for dramatic writing, but what was funny is I really did want to write books. I really, at that point in time in college, didn't want to write TV, but I wanted to go to art school. So I went there. And then afterwards I was in book publishing, which is how I met Nina, because one of my best friends, Stephanie, was working with Nina, and our 2 bosses in book publishing set us up together. So anyway, I spent my whole 20s just having fun in New York City, but desperate to be a writer, but like working because it's like you need a day job. And then I sold my first book. I think I was about to turn 30 because that was my whole goal. I was like, I have to do it by the time I'm 30. And that was like a collection of humor essays called I Do, I Did, Now What? About my first year of marriage. I am no longer married to that man. So that's pretty much all you need to know about that. But what was interesting is that book did get optioned for a TV show. And that is kind of what got me interested in TV writing, because I had nothing to do. The show ultimately didn't get on the air. But I had, I was kind of curious about it. And so I got to read the scripts and I was thinking about it. So when I left my husband after 5 years of marriage, and then I was debating like a career that could support me, because, you don't make that much money in books. I was like really thinking about going to LA and trying to pursue TV writing, which kind of led me to doing both.
Well, what's interesting, and I think people don't entirely understand how radically different the formats are. And the culture is when you're talking about television or film versus literature, what we consider printed books. And for you to work on a television show, which really expects the writers to grind 24/7, because, as I used to joke when I worked in TV, it's on 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. There is no pause. So you build a tremendous amount of stamina. And I think that's something that, I've noticed just in the very few conversations that we've had back and forth electronically, which is that you seem to possess an extremely, I would say, enviable degree of discipline. So I think there was one point where you and I were corresponding about setting this up, and you're like, I have to save my words. And it reminded me of my golf coach talking to my kids, who said, I only have so many words, I can't use them all on you. But also it's just that, it's that awareness, you know, that you are tapping into yourself as a resource and having to pull that out in the way that any kind of writer would, but particularly with television is pretty impressive and enviable. Now, you did write another book, you co-wrote a book that had one of the most hilarious titles I think I've come across, which is Men Are Stupid, Women Are Crazy. Or one could say Women Are Crazy and Men Are Stupid. And it's the proverbial chicken egg. No one knows which came first, but I totally agree with that title. So maybe you could share just a tiny bit about that.
Sure. That book was Simon and Schuster. And I want to say, gosh, when it had to have come out at least 10 years ago. And that was with my ex-boyfriend. Because after I got divorced, I went back to New York. And then I eventually was like, all right, I'll move to Los Angeles. And then I was like, I'm never going to get married again. I just really didn't think I would. And not that I was that disillusioned about marriage, but a little bit. And I was like, I wasn't planning on having children. So I was like, I don't know if there's a need, I can support myself. But I moved in with a boyfriend who had a 6-year-old son at the time named Dustin, which is why Dustin, the character. Dustin.
I was going to ask.
And Howard, he's the creator of Grace and Frankie, one of the co-creators of that show, Grace and Frankie. And then we were always having funny relationship conversations because he's a comedy writer too. And that was where Women Are Crazy, Men Are Stupid kind of came out. And that book got sold for a TV show and almost got made too. But then again, like there's so many TV shows that just don't make it on air. So that was another one.
Well, I think working in TV is actually a really good parallel to relationships, because it's fraught with a lot of false starts and a lot of hope and a lot of, you know, you can have just horrible disappointments, incredible successes, but you know, you really never know how long they're going to last. So, you know,
exactly.
It's
very
parallel. Yeah. Okay. So then to bring us up to now, Anna Kay, which, I mean, besides the fact that it's really an enjoyable book to read, because I loved it. I actually began rereading it in the past couple of weeks, but it's also such a big monster to tackle. Tolstoy,
right?
You know, which we know has been done before, and we know that, you know, a lot of the great classics have been retold. Clueless comes to mind, 10 Things I Hate About You, even, you know, like Cruel Intentions and things like that. But to tackle Tolstoy, I mean, and to tell it through the young adult lens, and then to incorporate all of these themes that are really so contemporary and present. Not only the Korean American theme, but also, you know, you're exploring class again, but in the context of New York City, which I know a lot of readers have kind of drawn some sort of comparison with Gossip Girl.
Right.
And I would almost say that that's where like Cruel Intentions sort of comes in. Right. But you managed to infuse so much about the Korean American experience, but in a way that is so interwoven definitely with the story, that I think it's also, you know, it's a great novel on that side of things on its own, because that's a voice that we don't often get to hear. Obviously, with the success of Crazy Rich Asians and the elevation of a lot of talent, you know, in Hollywood, we've seen a little bit more of that. And I know you've spoken with Margaret Cho and, you know, but I'm wondering, like, how do you do that? How do you merge those things? How do you merge Russian classical and contemporary you?
It wasn't like that I thought about like, you know, so many people have done Shakespeare, you're right, and Jane Austen and so many books. But I had always loved Anna Karenina. I read it as a teenager, like at 15. I read it again in my 20s. Like, I think after I was married, so maybe I was 30. And then I read it again. I mean, I read it 3 times. And every time it kept changing because, you know, when you're a teenager, it's all about the doomed love affair of Anna and Vronsky. But then it's really such a crazy, sweeping 800-page book. And it really discusses love on so many different levels, you know, with the other characters. So I've just always, you know, find something new in it every single time. But what started Anna Kay specifically is that in 2012, I was in New York City with my mom, newly single after I had, left my last relationship with Howard. And so I was like stuck with my mom for the holidays and we were there. And so we went and saw the Keira Knightley version of the movie adaptation at the Ziegfeld Theater. Sad that it's no longer there. So we went and saw that. And then my mom and I got into a really interesting discussion, which is my mother's very old-fashioned Korean, and she is very much believes that men are honestly better than women. It's been a power. I mean, it's a struggle my whole life with mom, like our things, because I mean, she is set in her ways, and and I will certainly argue back. But we were talking about that society, and it's such a tragedy what happened to Anna back then, which is she falls in love outside of her marriage. She does make a mistake and cheats, but then her entire life is ruined from it, right? Yeah. She's not accepted. She has no choices. She ultimately killed herself in the most terrible way, where Vronsky is fine. Like in a lot of times in society, the men get off scot-free, the women are judged, etc. And we were talking about that. And then the notion of first love. And I don't know. I think it was that night, I honestly couldn't sleep. And I went down, we were staying at the St. Regis Hotel, and I went down into the lobby. And I just had this epiphany, like, oh, if you did it in modern day, it would probably be a young adult novel, because a lot of times your first crazy love is as a teenager. And so I was like, oh, that would be kind of a fun idea. And then the whole train idea, because it's set St. Petersburg, Moscow, and me going Greenwich, Connecticut to New York City, I was like, oh, this is a no-brainer. It was just kind of like a light bulb, like divine inspiration. So it was super fun. And it's not like I had an ambition to start a young adult novel, but I was like, oh, this is such a fun idea. Like, it's always like something that I would want to try to do. But that was 2012. And I tried it a couple times, because you're right. It's like, how do I first off, who do I think I am to tackle like, one of the greatest novels of all time, but also like 800 page and to condense down the story. I didn't really figure out how to do it till it was like 2017 is when I started writing it in earnest, this version of it. Like I have old versions that just didn't work. It started because I had minor surgery. I was laid up in bed and I watched 6 seasons of Game of Thrones. So it was right before the last season.
Oh my goodness.
On Percocet and Soma. So just so you know, that made it so much better. I was so out of it and whatnot. I mean, I was bedridden for a week. But then afterwards, I still kind of had to hang out at home. So I read the first book of Game of Thrones because I was curious, like, about it after I was so interested. And I saw that it's really written very similar to the show. You know what I mean? Like, obviously the book came first, but I was like, oh, he did it very quickly with short chapters. Maybe that's how I should tackle Anna Kay. It was like I was like, I should use my TV knowledge now and structure it that way. Like, think of it as scenes rather than like getting lost. And that just, I don't know, it cracked it wide open. I just immediately started writing, and it was just like, it was one of, I drafted the thing, which means I only write going forward. Like, I don't think of the words. I don't go back. I don't look. And I was like, I'll look at it at the end because I just have to get it finished. I think I did 7 to 8 weeks, like 529 pages. I wrote, but it's all I did. I was stuck at home.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it was crazy. It was a little crazy. I was really obsessed. I was like the most obsessed. I was like all day on my laptop in bed in pajamas, and I just wrote and wrote and wrote. It was really great because I had a window between work. So I was like, I have to do this. And that's kind of how it kind of came about. But so the first part of the book really does follow the structure, but then starts to deviate. And for me, I really let the characters kind of decide what they wanted for themselves. Because like the Kimmy character, which is the Kitty character in the original, she gets depressed. She gets dicked over by a guy, basically by Vronsky. She's heartbroken, probably a little depressed. And I was like, in modern day, this girl would get mad. She would get pissed. And I really think that teen girls or any women just really like, I feel like women get vilified for being angry. Like, you're just like, there's like, especially in the workplace and also for teenage girls, I'm like, everyone has emotions. We're allowed to get angry and mad and cry and everything else without a problem. So I very much wanted to give voice to all the female characters in Anna Kay. And then the Korean thing came about. My brother, I always say, I was like, my brother is married to a blonde. Like my brother's Korean and obviously married to a white woman. And his kids are all mixed race. And he told me, 10 years ago, he was like, I think you should write books with, mixed race kids that look like my children so that they see that they can be the lead and that they're, because they live in a place outside of Philadelphia it's very white actually. So I think that's it. So I mean, he's like, I think it's so important for children to see, like, you don't have to comment on race. It doesn't have to be specifically about it, but that should be how the world is. And honestly, Disney Channel has a policy with that because all of their shows are very like diverse, and they make a point of it much longer than anyone else has for their children's programming to make sure they're, that's just what you see. That's just the way the world should work. So
well, I definitely appreciated it. And I think that what really, I mean, you say you don't speak about it directly, but having the presence of characters like Dustin's character, and having interracial relationships and respecting the nuances of those dynamics, but also the core of what those relationships are, I think is, it's really unusual. And I read a lot of young adult novels for pleasure, and also just because it was something that was required of me in my previous job. So I got in the habit of it. And it's not as prevalent as a lot of people would think. You're like, oh, it's 2020 and we see it on television. A lot of the series have it, but in literature, it's a lot harder to come by. And then I'm also married to a very blonde man and my kids. And it was nice. It was nice to have protagonists that I could relate to, even as a 47-year-old woman. I don't know, the math is hard, but but the other thing that I really did enjoy also was that even though it is a young adult novel, the adults get their moments, and you get to see the complexity of character there and the dynamics between parents and spouses and ex-spouses and the driving needs of women and men, and how like convoluted and crazy all of that can kind of become, which I think is really good.
Yeah, I really wanted to show different perspectives. It's funny, going from, I sold it at like, the book got published at maybe 440, think Microsoft Word, double space pages when I had done 529, and all that got cut was the adult stuff. Like I had backstories for a lot of the parents because I always find that so interesting now that I'm the age where I could have children this age of teenagers. I'm like, oh, it's just so interesting when you're like, oh, I don't know when that happens, when you're like, oh, I kind of used to always relate to the teens on the show, but then you're like, oh, I see it from the adult perspective now too, like that it's such an interesting world to me. So I always think it's so, I'm, even though I had issues with my mom and my parents being so super strict with me, I do feel that like their continual, I mean, my mom was kind of a tiger mom, basically. I mean, I had to do 2 hours of homework at the kitchen table, whether I had homework or not. Like, I mean,
right.
But that sort of discipline did kind of give me my work ethic, which is like, they taught me that if you work hard and you try and apply yourself, you can do anything. So even the first time before Anna Kay, I wrote 2 middle grade books for like 3rd and 5th graders. And I was working on the Disney Channel Shake It Up show at the time. And I had a failed pitch about a talking dog show that didn't go. But I was like, I figured out the whole thing and I loved the story. Maybe I should try to write a kid's book. Like, I mean, I think it was just gives me the idea, like, why can't I do it? I can do anything if I try. So I was like, oh, I will get up at 5:30 in the morning. And I was writing, 10 pages a day before work, before that. Cause I was just like, I've always been very ambitious with my writing career and trying to like get to the next level. It's tricky. It's hard.
I love that. Yeah. I mean, discipline is kind of everything. It's the message that I remember both of my parents saying to me, you'll be surprised how far you will go if you just continue to show up. If you continue being where you're supposed to be on time, she's like, talent will take you certain distance and then everything else is just, grinding.
Hard work. Yeah, you have to just push yourself. And also, I mean, certainly I'm in my 40s, obviously, but it was this idea of like, oh, trying a young adult novel. And I'm like, why can't I? I mean, why shouldn't I try? I mean, I still like have ambitions to like write a stage play, and I still want to, publish short stories. I still have plenty of things on my list that I'm like always trying to tick off here and there. So, well,
and I'm sure and I have a sneaking suspicion you're going to get to all of them. And as I like to say to people all the time, like, the outcome, whether it's successful or not, the outcome and the achievement is just the completion in a lot of cases, So once you start to kind of calibrate your views in that regard, you find that you can really do a lot. So now Anna Kay has a sequel, and Anna Kay is going to live in another format
Right.
So how, like, okay, like literally, you
Right.
did, you don't, like, what next? Like, what's going to happen with this? It's amazing.
So when I sold the book, I will say that I have had a very good Hollywood, career in the sense that like I've always been able to work year to year. Like I've always been on a show. Do I have like one of these super fancy ones where I made so much money and on a hit network show? No, I do not. No, I have never had that. I've tried, but it's just like, Hollywood, like any business it's a little bit of a popularity contest still. There's still like levels of hierarchy and snootiness and whatnot. And it's funny because, Anna Kay was always going to be a book. I always wanted to write it as a book first, but I also knew it could be a great TV show. Because I think the reason why I've seen all the Anna Karenina adaptations and none of them ever really worked to me because you can't condense 800 pages into 2-hour movie. No. So like this will be a perfect space now that like, premiere TV is so like good and you can do like the whole thing in 10 hours. So that was always my mind. But honestly, if I hadn't written the book first, I would not have had the clout to be able to sell this as an idea as a TV show. Like it just is. I'll just the truth. Like I'm not, I wasn't with Reese Brothers, but I didn't have fancy producers, etc. But then when I wrote the book, it immediately like my agency got flooded with, 25, 30 calls immediately in 2 days from the announcement on Publishers Weekly. I had I met with 15 different producers.
Wow.
For 3 weeks. I got sent vintage Cristal and sprinkled cookies. It was
you're like
money. Yeah.
You're like, yes.
I have to say, yeah. What was so great about it is that, if it had been earlier in my career, just say I was in my 20s, I'm sure it would have gone to my head and it would have been like overwhelming and whatnot. It was still fun for me because I never had that experience. But because I had been already in the business for 10 years and I knew the drill, it was nice that I was on the other side where people were pitching me for a change. It was really great. But I was also at the same time wanting to be very careful with the decision I made on like who I wanted to pick for my partners. And I had met Jenny Han, To All the Boys I Loved, she wrote that book once at a party, but I'm not like friends with her, but I read an interview with her where she was talking about selling that to Netflix because that's about a half Korean girl and how everyone wanted, I guess it's not necessarily whitewashing as much as colorblind casting. That's the word. Yeah. I would write a spec TV script with a Korean girl and they're like, maybe you should just not say she's Korean and just, it's called colorblind casting and it'll just help. That was like, honestly, for the last 10 years, it's how it's been. Now it's changing a little, but it's just the truth. And so she met with so many producers because her book was already a New York Times bestseller. And she picked the producers who agreed that they would make sure she was a Korean girl. And so I respect that. I was like, that's the way it has to be done. For me, I was never going to do this, other than like a half Korean girl. Though I do love Zendaya because, she was on Shake It Up and she's so talented before Euphoria. Sometimes I was like, oh, I would let Zendaya do it. I would do a half, as long as it was like definitely a diverse cast. It was great.
It's funny because I think about, well, first of all, Zendaya for some reason figures greatly in strange dreams that I have, where we're astronauts together or something. But I think that, when you reference her and when you reference To All the Boys I Love, it still feels like a fairly novel phenomenon in film and television to allow that kind of casting. And I say allow because people are actually allowing that to happen. You know what I mean? It's not that people haven't wanted to do it in the past. So I know we're going to be looking, and thank God serial television exists because otherwise it would be like Medea, that 8-hour misery of Greek tragedy. Which I don't know how many people were put through that. But the other thing that maybe I relate to it because we're of the same age group, is that there is a Gen X quality that kind of rides under the surface with all of this.
Right.
And I think there's a certain boldness that comes from that, but there's also a certain screw it attitude that I really, really connected with. So, I know you don't have kids of your own, but you do have, you have dogs of your own, and dogs figure greatly in everything.
Yeah, always. I always put dogs in. And then, like I said, my ex boyfriend. I lived with him for 5 years when Dustin was age 7 to 12 or so. And
wow,
he's now
those are the rough years too. Those are rough years.
Now he's a sophomore in Wesley and we're still really close. We're reading, we read books together and whatnot. We chat and text. I send him care packages to college. He's like a great kid. And so, I mean, like, that is as close to like being a stepmom as I've ever had and stuff. But yeah, I mean, in terms of the Gen X, I mean, it was funny. Everyone's like, oh, I didn't set out to write a YA. The characters were teenagers, so it had to be young adult. Like, that's just how publishing is categorized. Like, Catcher in the Rye were written today, it would be a young adult novel. It's just how Kill a Mockingbird, same thing. So, because I have a lot of drugs and sex and things in my book, and I try to be very responsible about it. But at the same time, I wasn't willing to take it out because I was lucky enough to have a lot of publishers interested, and some of them were like, "We're going to have to tone that down," and I was like, "I don't really want to," because I wasn't raised to be that wealthy myself. Like, I did not have that sort of childhood that, our teenage years. But I know plenty of teenagers through friends or growing up that had lives like that, and we're doing things. So,
well, and I think that, and it's good because it's honest. I mean, we all would like to have the PG version, but life really it doesn't factor out that way. And I actually, it was funny because I actually did go to college I was like, oh, I wonder if she knows so-and-so. I was like, that is really, because none of it, as far-fetched as it may seem, it's actually, none of it is far-fetched at all. It's actually quite realistic, shockingly realistic, to my dismay.
I know, might freak out here. But I went to prep school. Like, I did 1 year at a boarding school, St. George's, in Newport when I was, so it's like the late 80s. And my roommate was a Johnson & Johnson heiress. And so we became friends, and I went with her once for like, I think spring break to like the craziest mansion and their craziest lives. For her though, as a teenager, to her credit, she was just a teenager. She didn't know, it's like, that's how she was born into that sort of money and lifestyle. It's not like she picked it. So, because I also knew at the time when I was writing about it, I was like, is it the wrong time to write about a bunch of rich kids? And I really did think about that notion, but that's why Dustin for me is like the heart and soul and the moral compass of the book, because I needed an outsider perspective to be able to call these kids and be like, it's crazy that you live like this. Like, and I definitely followed through with that in like the second book too. I just really, I like that mix of like, the Natalia character and some of the other characters are not from that world. And that every time they get a glimpse of it, they always call the rich kids out on like, you have a purse fob that's $500. Do you know what that could do for me? Like, it's just like you kind of ground it a little bit. Like, I tried.
Absolutely. No, I love it. Well, I'm wondering, so as this transitions to television, I don't know this. Are you going to be writing? Are there writers that are going to be taking over?
I'm the writer, executive producer, the creator of the show. So HBO Max. We are in development hell. So, I mean, that's just like the nature of the beast of all TV. So it's like a much slower process. So.
But this is exciting. I'm looking forward to this. And then I know you just completed not that long ago, the second novel. So when should we be hoping to see that?
I wasn't planning on writing a sequel. I mean, I just wrote it as a one-off, but I had gotten a 2-book deal, but the second book was untitled young adult novel. So, I mean, it was kind of but once, the sales force of Flatiron Books was like, oh, we're getting a lot of like good encouragement. People are very interested in this title. What do you think about a sequel? And I was very busy last year and I was like, sure, like without really thinking it through. I mean, I had an idea of what I wanted to do, but I wasn't positive. So then, I actually, all of a sudden it was getting close to being due. It was due in March, actually, like right before this book came out, but I wasn't finished. I was close. And then the pandemic happened.
Yeah.
And I couldn't work. I couldn't, it was very hard to be creative. It was very hard to be like, would anyone be interested in reading the book now? Do you know what I mean? Because this book, the next book, the sequel, takes place in the summer directly afterwards. So technically it's still 2019. So it does work pre-corona, but I just didn't know about the tone, etc. So I really just took a pause for like 2 months. So then all of a sudden I really finished it. I don't even know what date it is. It's mid-June. I finished it like pretty much all of them in May and June. like the last
Okay.
quarter of the book and stuff. So they already have the cover out, and it says it's coming out on March 9th already of next year.
Wow. Oh,
Yeah.
that's so exciting. I'm
Yeah.
so thrilled. And I got to tell you, because I know you and I went back and forth about, like, should we be having this interview? Does it feel appropriate? And I think that, we both wanted to be sensitive to the fact that everything, especially because it seems to only be growing as far as the madness, the
Right.
sheer insanity of what's going on. And I have to say that, when we finally settled on doing it today, I was in the shower a couple days ago and I was like, you know what? Why in the hell should we not be talking about it? Because it's a massive achievement for you as a writer. It's a massive achievement as a woman. It's
Right.
positive. It's showing forward motion. And frankly, it's one of the few things that keeps most of us sane, especially in the Wolfer community, is like, we're avid readers. So, joy, yes. Escape for a moment, absolutely. And I'm just absolutely thrilled that you and I have finally gotten a chance to do this and to talk about it, because I really do believe that it's an excellent piece of writing and for the genre and beyond. So I'm just thank you so much.
I'm great. No, I think it's true. We did have like many debates about like when is the appropriate time. So it is a tricky time, I think, right now. But again, it's like positive messages, etc. And I'm very careful about that. I really, I want to be part of the solution as well. It's always been on my mind, even early TV, like, I bow to the worship of Shonda Rhimes, and like, she's done a lot, in television to really change the game for like diversity. And I just remember reading an early interview, she was like, anyone who comes into the hospital at Seattle Grace, any of the Black patients, they will never be gangbangers. They will never, you know what I mean? This is not
right.
what we're showing. Like, you just have to show like positive role models. And it's like her choice as a creator of how she wants to comment on race and like whatnot. But I think that's I think that's a great idea. Like I think that is. And I've heard so many, I worked on Boomerang on BET, and I've heard lots of stories of like, how tricky it is to be a diverse writer. And I have the same problem myself. So, change is coming, and hopefully now maybe it will definitely come faster. So
I would hope so. I absolutely would. And what I think that, and it's kind of, speaking of tricky, it's tricky for me to figure out how to say this. As a person of color,
right.
Other voices of other people of color, regardless of whether or not we share direct connection through our ethnicity or race or background or whatever, I think is important for all of us, because it starts to normalize our presence and our voices and our perspectives. And it also normalizes them as being American voices and perspectives, which I think is critically important. So, as far as speaking around the topic of what's going on right now socially, I do think it has a tremendous amount of value. And I think that there's, and I also, when I was like Tolstoy, Korean American, and then I was like, oh yeah, right. And I've been told this when when I've talked with a lot of other people. And I lived in Koreatown for many years and had a wonderful time. And it was probably the neighborhood that I felt least strange in, I think would be the way to put it, because I'm racially ambiguous. But I was like, oh yes, the Han of it all. Like there's this kind of shared experience when you are living in your own country, but still slightly outside of your own country. And that comes through also in the book, which is really beautiful. But I would like to say that it is racial. It's neutral in the sense that everyone is at equal levels of importance, regardless of their background. So well done, truly. Truly well done. I have to ask you a question that is more Wolfer related.
Sure.
So we're in our 40s.
Right.
How you liking it? How you liking it?
My 40s have been my best year, my best decade yet. Honestly, best decade for sure. I have to point out that I met my now husband, my second husband, in 2014, like on a book tour where I was in Los Angeles, he was in Brooklyn, and we met in like outside in Naperville, outside of Chicago, on a book tour because he's a kid's book author too. Total meet cute. And I really wasn't sure if I wanted to get married, but like in my head, it was like, if it's a romantic ideal. But it's not that I was like, oh, I'm never going to have a relationship after I broke up with Howard and I was in my 40s. I was like, oh, I'm just going to see how it goes, and see what
Mhm.
happens. But I don't know. We felt like madly in love. He moved out here and then he just like, we were going to Vegas to see friends anyway. He's like, I think we should get married. And I was just like, really? And then we got married and we're incredibly happy. So, I mean, that is the thing. So for my 40s, and I feel like what I learned the most about like all the relationships is that, that beginning stage where it's so amazing and it's so like magical and like there's so much sex and there's so much of everything. I was like, I'm going to enjoy it this time. And it was one of the first times, because I've always been super ambitious, where I was like, I'm going to kind of put work, not on hold, but like, it's not as important to me for this year. And I'm really going to enjoy this because maybe this is my last, like
Right.
this time. And I really want to remember it. And I think that also is what helped me write Anna Kay, because it was like that teenage obsession of like super love that you were into. And, and I think that really kind of helped me. And like, I put a lot of that into the book because it reminded me of that. And I just was like, I was older and wiser enough to know that like that part fades a little bit as the years go. And I wanted to really just enjoy it. So
yeah, there's nothing quite like that little, so good. It's truly delicious.
Totally right. So that's what I say about being in my 40s. I love it. I mean, I've had been great so far. So,
well, as they say, you're killing it.
Yeah.
I know you don't think, I know you're killing it. So I'm telling you, you're killing it.
Thank you. You should call my mom now and tell her I'm killing it.
I'm actually really good with moms. I'd be more than happy. Send her my way. All right. Well, Jenny, thank you for taking time out. I really appreciate it. We're going to promote the heck out of your book and the next one and the show.
Thanks.
So, and my daughter sends, in her emo way, her Billie Eilish way, she says, thank you. Thank you.
Happy to help anytime.
All right. Well, hopefully we'll get to see each other in person once this is all over, because even though we're cross town, it's like a country apart. But
yes, I want to take you out to dinner. We'll have dinner.
Definitely. Okay. It's on me.
Okay.